Hey there, everybody. Ginzburg here, digital marketing expert, and I'm very excited because I have a new guest on the show today, Jane Leung, Director and Chief Investment Officer at Scenic Advisement. How's it going, Jane?
Great, Jean. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We're very excited to have you here, and of course, we have some questions to ask you. We want to learn more about what you've been up to. So tell us. Let's get started with just tell us about yourself and your background.
Okay, sure. So I'm the Chief Investment Officer of Scenic Advisement. I've been with the firm for about a little over 3 years now. It's a 5-year-old investment bank, a boutique investment bank that works pretty much with private technology companies, late stage companies. And before that, I was at BlackRock and BGI, one of the world's largest asset managers for 14 years, managing institutional portfolios and kind of enjoying life in Asia for the past 7 years before that, sort of during that tenure. And it was really great.
Great. So, tell us how you got started in the investing space.
Well, you might not believe this, but it was really through an internship during my junior year at UCLA. It was with a portfolio manager who basically taught me the ins and outs of managing portfolios at technology companies. Typically here in Silicon Valley, but it's really growing more globally. And we've just found that, with the trend of late stage private companies staying private longer, we're seeing a lot of needs from founders and early investors in these companies to find liquidity in the markets. And so when I joined Scenic Advisement, I was really looking for a way to meld my institutional portfolio management experience with what was needed in the private market.
And is there certain types of verticals that you typically work with, or certain types of companies?
Well, it's interesting because we work with quite a wide range of companies. So, from the ride sharing, the large ride sharing companies that you may know, to consumer services, to biotechnology, healthcare, software as a service, we really do manage to work with a lot of different interesting people and companies.
Oh, that does sound very interesting. That sounds like a wide array of verticals and industries across the board. Is there anything that unifies these companies for you? I mean, are there special strategies that you're using across the board, or is it just different verticals will have different strategies?
Well, I think the thing that unifies a lot of our clients is really the need for liquidity. So historically, the private markets have really been opaque and very difficult to gain access to, both from an investor perspective, but also from an early employee perspective. There's just no public market, so you can't trade it like Apple stock.
Hmm.
But at the same time, there are needs for people who've been working at the same company. Let's say they're a founder that's no longer with the company, or they've been at the company since its inception, and they really don't have much to show for it except for all these private shares that seemingly are worth something, but there's not really worth anything until it's actually traded. So one of the things that we are able to do for all the folks that we work with is to find that liquidity in the market. And I think that's what unifies our clients across the different sectors that we work in.
Oh, okay. No, that's an interesting point. So let's jump into some of the trends. What are some key trends that you're seeing in the investment space today?
Well, I think just one of the main ones that we're seeing are that indeed private companies are staying private longer. I mean, the average company is going public a lot more later in its life than it used to. I mean, these days it's probably about 8 or 10 years before a company goes public, whereas in the first um, uh, you know era, it was probably only 3 or 4 years before a company would go public. And so that trend is really continuing because there's so much capital that is invested in the private markets. And a lot of this actually came, after the global financial crisis in 2008, when institutional investing preferences changed, the whole macro environment changed with interest rates staying low. And I think there was just a desire to seek different kinds of alternative investments. And that's where we saw more interest going into the private markets. So I think these trends of private companies staying private longer, for more money going into private markets, that's going to continue for quite some time.
Interesting. And so how come companies are staying longer private these days?
Well, I think for one, it's you've got a lot of challenge sometimes when you're in the public markets because you've got shareholders to deal with, you've got shareholders and earnings and analysts kind of breathing down your neck all the time when you're a public company. I think private companies, particularly ones in technology, are able to stay more nimble and more innovative when they're able to kind of have more control over their destiny. And so from that perspective, we think that because there's the money there, the investors are there, there's a lot of capital still flowing to the private markets, there's no real incentive or reason for private companies to go public these days like they used to. In fact, I think one of the more interesting statistics that we saw were there were about 8,000 public companies in the 1990s, and now there's pretty much about half of that. So we're really seeing a lot more companies staying private longer.
Oh, I did not know that was the stat that there were 8,000 public companies, and now there's only about 4,000 public companies.
Yeah.
Oh.
So I mean, you can just start to see that trend has been happening over the last few decades, and we see it continuing to do so.
Oh, wow, that's a point I did not know about at all. And you always say you learn something new every day, so that's an interesting tidbit. So. So you've worked, of course, with a lot of startups and entrepreneurs. What are some, let's say, maybe 3 pieces of advice that you would give to a startup or entrepreneur who is looking to pitch an investor or VC?
Yeah, that's a good question, and there's probably a lot of pieces, but I'll try to keep it brief. One is really to make ambiguity your friend. I mean, I think that there's so much that is not black and white these days in any kind of industry, both in traditional industries as well as niche sectors, but particularly in technology and for startups. You just have to know that you're going to have to be aware that nothing is set in stone, that you need to be able to pivot and change direction. And while you want to have a strategy and a good, vision and plan, you've still got to change and adapt and be flexible due to the market conditions. And I think that's a critical piece of advice that I definitely recommend to all entrepreneurs and people in startup companies. The second piece of advice I'd say is just don't take no for an answer. I think persistence, more so in a startup environment than anywhere else, is critical. I mean, you're going to get a lot of people who are going to say no, whether it's people who are potentially looking to invest in your company or, vendors that you want to work with and partners. But you just have to stay persistent, because if you have a vision and you have a dream, you just got to keep pressing at it. I think that's really key. And then I think the last piece of advice I'd say is to really understand that it is about the people. It's about the team that you have, or if it's just you, it's about you. It's even probably less so about the business than it is about the people and the people driving it. I think that's really, really key. And I think especially in the days that we are in that are kind of like fraught with automation and all kinds of things around productivity and robots taking over, I think it's important to know that like at the very base of everything are the people that are running the business, and that is critical. So you want to have the right team, a good team, a smart team, and a driven team.
That's absolutely, I totally agree with that. I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to be the people that you work with, your founders, your co-founders, your team, your executive team. So it's so critical to have people that you want to be around with all day long, because that's going to be the case, right? You're going to be around these people all the time.
That's right. I mean, it was one of the first things that people used to ask me as I was interviewing people to join a team, and they said, like, what's the most important? What gets you up in the morning? Why do you come to work? And I said, it doesn't feel like work. It's actually fun. So when you're having fun, that's one of the best things about a job. It's not really a job. But the second thing is really, it's all about the people. It's about the people that you work with. It's about it feeling like a family, because you do spend, in many cases, more hours in the day than you probably would at home. So you better like the people that you're with.
Yeah, that's so true. Our team is really kind of an extension of our family, if you will. So absolutely, thank you for the advice. And of course, these audiences who are listening to this, and anybody out there who is a founder or a startup founder, these are all interesting and I think very good points that you can take back to your business, and things about your team, and of course being persistent. That's one of them. So thank you very much for those words of wisdom to startup and entrepreneur founders. And the other question I had was just about, you are one of the few minority females out there who's broken the glass ceiling in Silicon Valley and really established herself as a leader in the investment banking space. What kind of advice would you give to women entrepreneurs pursuing a career, or just women just pursuing a career in investor or VC space?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jean. I think the biggest thing that I would say to a young female or male entrepreneur that's starting up in the ranks and kind of growing their business and their careers, to really try to gain as much perspective as you can as quickly as possible. I think that sometimes that's easier said than done, and sometimes that just comes with time. But to the extent that you can, really figure out like where you are, where you've been, and where you're going, I think that's going to be critical for going, going forward in the future. I think that, particularly, in the Me Too movement, for example, there were, there are a lot of folks that are of a younger generation who are just, absolutely, up in arms that things like this can even happen. And in many ways, that's true. Like, why do they ever happen? But at the same time, having some perspective and recognizing that we've actually come a long way from, decades ago when things were a lot worse, that we should appreciate the journey and appreciate what has been done to forward movements along and to forward things and make them better. But at the same time, recognize that, yeah, we need to continue to make it better and do things that continue to drive change and drive a different way of thinking. But also, again, having that perspective to realize that, like, we've done a good job as well too. We just need to continue to keep fighting and pressing forward.
Yes, absolutely. So true. We, as women entrepreneurs or women in the VC space, it's just a matter of pushing forward, right? There's always going to be challenges, but there's always things that we need to do to keep moving forward and to keep those challenges at bay if we can. So that's really good advice for women who are listening to this. So thank you for that. And the last question is, how can audiences get in touch with you or with Scenic Advisement?
Well, feel free to come visit us. So we have a website, www.scenicadvisement.com. I'm available as well too by email, and certainly I know we're on media as well. So I'm happy to chat with anyone and talk about the fun issues of life and both management and VCs.
Absolutely. Actually, speaking of social media, so how are you guys using social media within your organization, or are you the companies that you're helping or investing in using social media? And if so, how are they doing that now? That's a topic that I talk about all the time, of course, as being a digital marketing expert.
Yeah, well, certainly we utilize LinkedIn quite a lot. I think that's been a wonderful forum, and Facebook and Twitter, I think probably the ones that you're all familiar with. But we're also exploring new ways to get involved and get out there. So be on the lookout.
Oh, excellent. Well, thank you so much. Wonderful to have you here. Great advice for entrepreneurs and startups, especially ones that are looking for funding. And so I hope that this is something that you guys can take back to your business and implement. So thank you again, Jane Leung of Scenic Advisement. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much, Jean.
Thanks.